Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Well, I rise today to say that this Australian Parliament should ban clauses, investor-state dispute resolution clauses, in any agreement that Australia signs. It's as pure and simple as that. I find it extraordinary, Mr Acting Deputy President, that a government which has made an art form out of talking about Operation Sovereign Borders, suggesting to the Australian community that it is somehow protecting Australia's sovereignty from refugees, would in fact be prepared to negotiate away our own national sovereignty. And that is exactly what investor-state dispute resolution clauses do. They essentially hand over decision-making to multinational corporations. This is the agenda of the plutocrats. This is the agenda of the oligarchs. This is the agenda to say that democratically elected parliaments are subject to the demands of corporations, multinational corporations, but corporations based in any of the member states of any agreement which is signed. And in the case of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that is Australia, the United States, Japan, New Zealand, Canada, Mexico, Peru, Chile, Singapore, Brunei, Malaysia and Vietnam. But the big point here is we have a parliament to make the laws that govern this country in the public interest. That is fundamentally what Parliament is about. That's why we are elected to this place. And what's going on at the moment is a negotiation in secret of a text of a trade agreement that the Australian community cannot see. Now, we have the government saying, oh, this is normal, we don't share this with people, and actually the parliament will get to look at it, yes, after it has been signed off by Cabinet, and the parliament then only has the right to reject the entire treaty or not. The fact of the matter is this government, Prime Minister Abbott, Mr Robb, the minister, are negotiating away Australia's sovereignty and placing it in the hands, particularly in this case, of corporations based in the United States. Now, the shocking thing here is that the United States Congress has got access to the text, but we don't. We don't in this parliament. But if you are a member there in the United States, you can get access to the text. Yes, you might have to sign a confidentiality agreement, but you get to see what it is that America is the American government signing up to. But we don't. We have no idea. Nobody in Australia on the street, the stakeholders, none of us know exactly what is being signed up to. So secrecy, lack of transparency really matter in cases like a Trans-Pacific Partnership or in cases like investor-state dispute resolution. Now, why am I saying that it is an assault on Australia's sovereignty and sovereign whole decision of the parliament or the judiciary either? And it's not just parliamentarians like the Greens who are objecting to this. It is the judiciary is worried as well, because the chilling effect of this is that corporations can sue a government if a government moves to take legislative action that undermines their profits. Now, the classic case that Australians may be familiar with is, of course, the cigarette companies with the Philip Morris case. It's already happening. Philip Morris is suing Australia under an ISDS provision in a Hong Kong-Australia investment agreement. And they've also sued Uruguay for increasing the size of health warnings on cigarette packets. Legal advisor to Uruguay said, quote, "They are bullying us because we are small. This is like David and Goliath. But we will fight because it's our right and duty as a government to protect our citizens' health." New Zealand Health Minister has delayed the introduction of plain packaging in New Zealand because the fear of being targeted with similar litigation. And this is what's known as regulatory chill. where governments are afraid to legislate because it may lead to being sued by a corporation, and there are plenty of examples you can think of in Australia where that might happen. You might have it with companies who are wanting to engage in fracking, for example. And if Australia brings in a ban, you can see where they, if they had already started their operations, would be suing the government for bringing in a regulation that protects public health. The same in terms of GMOs. It is, of course, we know Monsanto would love to be able to sue Australia because Tasmania has a GMO-free moratorium. We make sure we don't have GMOs in Tasmania. It's part of our commitment to the environment, but commitment to the clean, green and clever brand of Tasmania. But Monsanto would love to sue on that occasion, and it has happened in other jurisdictions. Let me tell you, in the wake of Fukushima disaster, there was a groundswell of opposition to nuclear power in Germany, and the government responded to this powerful movement by announcing a shutdown of the nuclear power industry. Soon after, Vattenfall, a Swedish utility that operates 2 nuclear plants in Germany, demanded compensation of €3.7 billion under the ISDS clause of a treaty on energy investments. In responding to the will of the people, in responding to what they saw after Fukushima, the government tried to act in the best interests of the health of the German people, and in came the corporation to say, you are actually undermining our profits out of nuclear power, and therefore we want compensation. In terms of Canada, in Canada, oil and gas giant Lone Pine is suing the Canadian government for $250 million over Quebec's moratorium on fracking, and that's enabled by the ISDS clauses in the North American Free Trade Agreement. Lone Pine alleges that the fracking moratorium reduces, quote, the expectation of a stable business and legal environment, unquote. Never mind the instability that will arise from fracking, including water insecurity, loss of farmland and ultimately global warming. What we are also seeing is the NGOs coming out. The Sierra Club, in relation to this issue with Canada and Lone Pine, has said, quote, if a government is not even allowed to take a time out to study the impact of fracking without having to compensate a corporation, it puts a tremendous chill on the government's ability to regulate in the public interest. And you've also got a situation with an Australian company, Oceana Gold and El Salvador. Australian mining company is currently suing El Salvador for $301 million, equivalent to half of a poor country like El Salvador's education budget, because it refused to issue them with a gold mining licence. The situation goes back to 2004, when the company applied for a mining permit and assured the government that its work would be environmentally friendly and would provide jobs for local people. In the interim, the damages of mining proliferated in El Salvador. 90% of the country's surface water became contaminated. Acid mine drainage, which has killed aquatic life and destroyed water quality in the region. High rates of disease linked to arsenic poisoning. Currently, just 2% of El Salvador's water is determined by the government to be of good quality. The El Salvador government says the original application to mine did not meet environmental safety standards and that the proposed mine poses risks to the country's already limited water supplies. Oceana Gold denies the risks, even though everybody knows that gold mining is notorious for polluting waterways with arsenic, mercury and other toxic metals. As a result, the government failed to approve the proposal and instituted a moratorium on mining permits, as you would expect they would do in the public interest. But of course, what has happened is that for El Salvador, we're now seeing under the ISDS clauses of the North American Free Trade Agreement the company go after the El Salvador government. If it succeeds, it would significantly reduce the funds available for healthcare and education, and even if Pacific Rim's claims fail, as many expect, this lawsuit has cost El Salvador almost $13 million to date, which amounts to nearly its entire environment and natural resources spending in 2013. Now, that's going on already around the world, and that is precisely what Australia is lining up for. And I wonder how much it's going to cost the Australian government to defend the case against Philip Morris. In fact, it would be very interesting for the government to tell us already how much precious taxpayer dollars has gone into having to take it up to Philip Morris in the courts, because Philip Morris is suing us for daring to legislate in the public interest with plain packaging. So it would be good to hear from the government in the course of this debate the cost to the public purse. I also want to point out that the Labor Party, when it was in government, wanted to sign up to the free trade agreement with Korea. But I am pleased to say the Minister of the day, Craig Emerson, came out and said, "We can't conclude the agreement with Korea as a matter of principle and in keeping with the commitments that we made. We said to Korea, no, we cannot do it." He said, "If we had agreed with Korea, it would be inevitable that we'd have to agree with it within the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other trade agreements. It was obvious to us if we'd said yes to Korea, how do you say no to the United States?" He said, "We considered it long and hard, and we had to stare into the abyss of having to say, we just can't conclude the agreement with Korea." They knew, the Labor government knew at the time, if they signed up to the trade deal with Korea with ISDS in place, it would get rolled over into the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, and that's precisely what's happening. And it is disgraceful that now that Labor is in opposition, they went along with the government signing up to the free trade agreement with Korea with that investor-state dispute resolution clause in place. That means Labor and the government in Australia are selling out Australia's sovereignty. They're doing it in secret. There is no text for anyone to see. And what is even worse, in terms of the US Congress having access to the text but we don't have it, is that they're asking us to sign off on the text here in Australia, sign it off in this parliament before it is concluded in the US, and the US reserves the right to change it if it doesn't suit US companies or the US Congress or however they go about their consultation process. So if ever Australia was selling out our sovereignty to US and to corporations, it is under this agreement. This is the agenda of the corporate world. This is the agenda about getting rid of regulation on a global scale to maximise their absolute destruction of the planet at the lowest possible price and at the expense of local people, jobs, wages, conditions, the whole lot. And that is exactly what you're going to see in investor-state dispute resolution, and it's why the Europeans, are backing off this at a great rate. The Europeans in their parliament have had a letter from 100 legal and other experts in the field saying, back off this in Europe, it is a bad idea. And they have had to hold and start looking at what it actually means in the European context to sign up to agreements with investor-state dispute resolution clauses in them. But think about it. If you have a multinational corporation that is threatening a country, why would a parliament then move to legislate for a ban on fracking, to stop environmental destruction, if they know they're going to incur the wrath of the corporation suing them and the legal costs associated with defending it? The whole point of a parliament, the whole point of sovereignty, is to be able for the parliament to be the ultimate decision-makers and the courts being the ultimate decision-makers in terms of what the legal framework, what the laws of the country are and how the laws of the country are implemented. Once you hand over, devolve that decision-making power to corporations, you might as well give up as a parliament and as a government, and that is precisely what the Abbott government is doing. And the Labor Party knows it. They had this experience with the Korean Free Trade Deal. That's why, to their credit, they didn't sign up, because they knew what investor-state dispute resolution meant. Tragically, they've now gone onto the same bandwagon as the government. But the people of Australia don't like it. The people of Australia don't like the idea that once again we've got a Liberal government that pretends to protect the sovereignty of Australia, selling out to the United States and, in particular, selling out to multinational corporations, because that is the consequence of what is going on. And when you have, I've cited the examples, the Philip Morris case, I've cited the Canadian case of Lone Pine, the German case of the anti-nuclear, the El Salvadorian case in terms of environmental regulation. And you know, the trouble with some senators on the other side is that they prefer ignorance and ideology to get in the way of evidence. The evidence I've presented stands alone.
Senator McDonald, in 4 minutes and 6 seconds you'll get your turn. Please let Senator Milne talk.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. But this bill that we have here, and I can tell you, the Chief Justice of the High Court of Australia, Robert French, has raised his concerns about ISDS effectively establishing a parallel legal system where Australian judges have no voice. Now, Senator McDonald thinks, obviously, that he knows better than the Chief Justice of the High Court of Australia, Robert French, but I think when you've got the Chief Justice saying that what you are doing is selling out the sovereignty of the Australian Parliament and the Australian legal system, you should start thinking about that. Saying that it's setting up a parallel legal system where Australian judges have no voice, that should be of major concern to Australians. I mean, people are already worried that this government is governing for the big end of town, and we are seeing it absolutely when it comes to their refusal to crack down on tax avoidance, the huff and puff of the Treasurer before the G20, all about tax avoidance, until we had to ask for a delay of Australia actually engaging in the exchange of information around the world that would lead to a crackdown of tax avoidance. Then, before Christmas in my EFO, taking out the tax avoidance measures that were in that document removed. We are seeing it left, right and centre. The two greatest threats to humanity and the planet are the growing inequality around the world in accumulation of wealth and global warming. Those two things together are driving massive social unrest, ecological destruction, and the people driving it are the corporate world, the 1% who own the vast majority of the Earth's resources now and their wealth, want to secure a regulatory environment which is lowest common denominator, and they want to use these investor-state dispute resolution clauses to do it. This is a dangerous assault on the integrity and capacity of the Australian Parliament to govern in the best interests of Australian people, our well-being and our health, done in secret, handing over to the United States the right to actually change the text after the Australian Parliament has signed off on it, and we will be subjected to it after that. What sort of government acts as a doormat to that kind of agreement? Well, I can tell you which sort of government. It's the Abbott government. It's the very people who pretend they're interested in Operation Sovereign Borders while actually undermining the sovereignty of our nation in a very, very frightening way. Now, you only have to see what's going on with the power of the corporates. We have to take our democracy back, and one way of taking our democracy back is banning investor-state dispute resolution clauses in any agreement that Australia signs. That is the way we take our democracy back, we restore the sovereignty of our parliament and our legal system, and we prevent the multinational corporations of the planet from overseeing the best interests of Australia and the environment. And if we don't, you're going to see billions of taxpayers' dollars over the years set aside in legal cases, and the culprits responsible are sitting in this parliament pretending to be a responsible government as we speak.
Thank you.